Well, hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for What's New with Tridion Docs 14 SP4, a webinar with Joe Pairman and myself. I'm Chip Gettinger. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, this meeting will be recorded, and the recording will be made available after the webinar within the next several hours. Secondly, Joe and I would encourage you to please ask questions. There should be a question panel in your GoToWebinar area, and please ask questions there. And we will do a Q&A session at the end of our webinar. So on that point, Joe, let me hand it over to you to get started, and I'll be back soon. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you, Chip. So yeah, we're both really excited to show you what's coming up in Tridion Docs 14 SP4, the release that's due in just weeks from now, a couple of weeks from now. So before we get into that, just a little background for people who may not know us so well. I started in kind of language and communications, but really started to get into structured content when I worked at HTC, the smartphone and now virtual reality manufacturers in Taiwan. And I was part of the user education team there, and I saw we had some big challenges to kind of get out content at the right scale, but also in the right formats for our customers in HTC. So we had people, millions and millions of users all over the world using the phones. We had to get the content onto the phones. We had to make it contextual, so it was really talking to them about what they needed to do on their phones. So lots of interesting times over there. And that's the time when I really became a customer and also an implementer of Tridion Docs. Well, it was Trisoft, it was known then, but of course Tridion Docs now. And so in the interim, I got the chance to do consulting in the fields for some really interesting organizations, and then joined as product manager for Tridion Docs 3.5 years ago now, and now in RWS, of course, and now director of product management. Chip, could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure, Joe, if you want to, there we go. So thank you, Joe. It's good to see everyone again today. Chip Gettinger. I've been now with STL, now former STL, now RWS for 13 years. My background is actually in publishing. And so I went to Northern Illinois University, where I actually studied publishing. And if I'd stayed with my studies, I would have gone into graphic arts and printing. But instead, I found myself getting involved in content and content management, and found myself at Xerox in the 90s. And we all remember the document history and all that fun stuff. And then eventually I found myself here. And here at RWS, my team focuses on a lot of adoption and best practices for our customers and partners, and understanding our products and our solutions, how they fit into the business. And I'm very proud of my team, and many of you know them, providing workshops and other aspects and demos to the products. And one of my fun areas I enjoy when I'm not working is doing Pilates. So I still do it on Zoom, even though we've been in the pandemic. So back to you, Joe.
That's great, thanks. And yeah, Chip, I realized I didn't talk about hobbies. Well, got.
Yeah, what do you do, Joe? You have some pretty interesting ones.
I did. So my daughters, though, they're 7 and nearly 9, and so I guess they're my hobbies for now. They keep us really nice and busy. But yeah, I used to play saxophone and hoping to pick it up again. It's currently under the bed and should be kind of on a saxophone stand somewhere, getting some use. Great. So I wanted to, well, a lot of the theme about this release and the past few releases has been on broadening the appeal of Tridion Docs, so bringing the same kind of benefits that we know to a wider audience, whether that be more different users in your own organization or different kinds of organizations even. But before we do that, I think it's sometimes nice to kind of reset and just say, well, what are these core benefits? Because of course we have impressions, perhaps we think it's all about, tech docs, it's about reuse, it's, perhaps we'll think structure and so on. But what are we really getting out of this? Because after all, nobody's going to pay for these words, structure, reuse. What does that really mean from a kind of management point of view? So what's the core of what this kind of product does for organizations? So we really it's about surfacing critical information to get people's work done. I say work, it could be any task. It could be, of course, a product manual, something that you bought, and again, you're looking to get the most out of the product. But very often it's in a workplace kind of a context. So it could be policies, procedures, guidelines, not only things around what you might recognize as technical content, so kind of software manufacturing, but increasingly kind of rules and regulations type content. So it could be accounting guidelines, it could be legal guidelines, all sorts of stuff like that. Increasingly in these kind of domains, people are recognizing the benefits of this way of handling content. So it's critical information. But you know, if you only had a little bit of that information, you wouldn't really need to take this approach, right? If all of the critical information that you needed to get your work done in your organization was contained in one Word document, well, great, you're done, you're good to go. You don't need anything else. So of course, we all face this challenge that it's from a large body of information. It's about getting the right information and getting it to a nice place for people to be able to access it conveniently, wherever that is. You know, I mentioned my experience, early experience of contextual delivery to the phones, and that's increasingly common, of course. Virtual reality and augmented reality are getting more and more important, so it could be delivery to these channels. Of course, you've got your kind of traditional desktop outputs, if you like, your kind of browser-based, and then of course you've got good old kind of print formats, PDFs and so on. So all of these different formats and getting them from a large body of information. But I think all of that is kind of is great. It's the value of the content, but then the other part of the value is what are you avoiding by having access to this technology, because you're avoiding a lot of risk, I would say. The big risk that the content is inaccurate and is going to tell people to do the wrong things, whether it's applying the accounting rules wrongly, fixing the huge mining machine wrongly so it goes amok and kind of, you know, does some damage or whatever. It's these kinds of risks that I think we're all concerned about as well. And how do we minimize the risk? It's about getting the accurate content. And again, if you only had one flavor of your content to worry about, maybe not one Word document, but 100 very standardized ones that never really changed, again, you wouldn't need to worry about it so much. But I think we're all working in this very complex kind of world where you have different flavors of documents, could be for different geographies, different versions of rules, different versions of products. And so it's really essential that we pick the right piece from all of that. So it's kind of variant management, which is the other side of the coin of reuse. So content reuse is really a way to get to that goal. And of course, all the cost savings and benefits from that as well, not to discount them. But I think at our core, you know, we're reducing risk, we're generating more value from the same content. And we're recognized for this. You know, we've had various analyst accolades over the years, and the latest one is from IDC, where they recognize Tridion as a leader in the authenticated digital workspaces market. It was a little bit of a mouthful, but I hope you can recognize from that, you know, it's about workplace content, critical stuff to do your job done, to get your job done, and we're recognized as a leader in this space. So this is really encouraging. But then it's, how are you able to get these benefits? How can we make that easier? Because of course, traditionally, this kind of technology has come with a certain ownership burden, right? And we have this sense that, yes, we have our power tools where you do the kind of the real kind of heavy duty content wrangling. You have the publication manager, you have kind of your oxygen and everything, you have the access to the web client. Still really important to get that core kind of governance, and the fact that we have those humans in the loop all the time. You know, we're not just relying on a machine to do these bits for us. So it's still a very, very important part of the suite. But we needed to make it easier to use the tools and say, well, not everybody needs to understand, you know, like conrefs, variables, conditions, all of these kinds of mechanisms, baselines, you know, versions, branches, all of the things that we do to get this value out. Not everybody needs to know that. You have very competent kind of users, domain experts who know their domain. They know how to write, obviously, the language. They've had higher training and so on. and yet they need an easy environment to be able to kind of express this and get that content down. So that's where we added draft space. So first of all in Tridion Docs 14, and iteratively improving over SP1, 2, 3, and now 4. So draft space is this place where you, as an author, you get actually quite some control over content. You get to not only write it, but see it in context of the broader kind of content set, move it around, kind of change your outlines and everything. So quite powerful, but still with that sense that this is focusing on the pure content and less about the structure. And this has been really successful. We had seen this as bringing the value of docs to maybe other verticals in some ways. And so that's where we see the increase in kind of policies and procedures and accounting stuff. What we probably hadn't anticipated quite so much is how appealing it's become, not only to kind of subject matter expert groups in our existing customers, but also actually some of the authors themselves, the original technical authors, are saying, well, this looks really nice and easy to use. I want to spend more time here. It's a nice place to be. So draft space has really taken on and grown in appeal. And so to the point where people are stretching the limits even to say like, okay, now I want it to do more like the heavy duty XML editing. Sometimes you have to think, well, where's the best place to do that and so on. But really very positive adoption, and great to see people getting the value out of a streamlined kind of focused writing environment like this. And then of course you have the reviewers, where traditionally the reviewing task was out of the system, made things very, very complicated. You had to manage all of those comments on all of those different copies of documents. And now it's all centralized in this nice place. And again, we've had lots of questions to say, well, I want to take this a bit further. You know, I want to really see how this content is working, not really the structure, but if it's a note, I really need to see what type of a note is it. I need to understand the outline, and I need to focus quickly on just the right part for me and so on. So lots of really positive feedback that we've been acting on to improve these tools. And this general theme, I'll leave it for now, but this theme of making the power of Tridion Docs available to more organizations and more groups in existing customers, that's just going to continue. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But for now, the question of the webinar, what's new in Tridion Docs 14 SP4? There's a lot, there's really a lot. So much that although Chip's going to do quite a nice detailed demo shortly, and I have a few highlights here, we really don't have space for all of the things that we've tweaked. So do look out also on the community, on the RWS community as it is now, so it's community.rws.com. Have a look for the announcement around the time of the launch in the release in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll have a lot more detail there on what's been improved. But I did want to mention also the community in the sense of if you're not already registered to contribute ideas, please do, because it's a great kind of forum. We read all the ideas. We're getting a little bit better about responding to them now. It's we're catching up a bit, got some catching up to do, but they're really very useful. So ideas like this one, the spell checker in draft space, which actually we've just implemented in Tridion Docs 14 SP4, and lots of others. And it's not only about posting new ideas. I mean, there's plenty of good ones going back a little while, so you can look for those, see if it's similar to what you need, vote them up, comment on them, add different use cases. A really good place for kind of discussing these things. So a couple of other things that we've added. There was a suggestion to have an accept change button, you know, in the same style as Microsoft Word, where a reviewer is suggesting a change. And instead of copying and pasting that change into the content, you want the ability to just click a button and it gets adopted straight away. So we have that accept change button now, again, as of SP4. Of course, something like this, there's quite a lot going on under the hood to make it resolve with all the kind of tagging structures and stuff. It's not as easy as you might think. That's why it took us a little while to get there. But most of the time, you're going to be able to just press that button, accept the change, and in it goes. If for some reason, if it could damage your tagging or cause confusion to accept it in that way, it'll actually be grayed out, but you still have the ability to copy and paste into the content. So it all works nicely, and most of the time it just works as a direct accept change like in Microsoft Word. drag and drop in the outline view as well. This has been something people have asked for a while. It was in the community ideas as well, and that's now in SP4. The ability to add the kind of multimedia focused object element, we now have that in draft space as well. And Oxygen 23 support was another request which we've implemented. So do please keep posting those ideas and voting on the ones that are there and commenting on them. A few more highlights though. So there are quite a few changes to that outline panel. So not just the ability to drag and drop topics in draft space, but also some kind of labels and some ability to filter on things in certain stages, in certain statuses. So you can very quickly get to what you're supposed to focus on. That's important, of course, if you're a reviewer and you want to focus on everything in a certain review status. But also if you're an author, I mean, it could well be that you've been assigned a bunch of kind of subtopics to go through and fill out, and you could focus on all of those topics, let's say in a draft status, for example. So this is really nice, and a couple of other tweaks as well to let you expand the outline again and collapse it and focus on what you need quite quickly. Document history and review space. This is an option, and it gives you a really, really detailed view of all the recent revisions of a topic. So not for everybody, because it gives you so much detail, but when needed, if your reviewers want that level of detail, it's available in review space too now. Filtering conditional content. It was really important in review space that we had this sense of this is what the content is going to be when it's published. Now we're not trying for kind of WYSIWYG because of course, as I've just said, there are so many potential outputs you could be getting. How can we make it look exactly like any one of those? The focus in review space is always on the content, but you do want to see, of course, what should be in and out, like per your conditional context. And so we've got filtering working nicely now in review space, not only within the topic, but if you're filtering in the map as well. So that means the outline and collector spaces, and that's working as well. And many other kind of tweaks, note rendering. So you see the label on which kind of note is which, very important for reviewing that things are tagged correctly. We've got higher contrast because when content was non-editable, for example, because it was reused or because it was locked, it was a little bit too kind of light. The contrast wasn't great enough, so that's tweaked now as well. Image placement is looking better, and a lot of other tweaks. In draft space, we've got the spell checker, as I mentioned, so a centralized spell checker to make sure that everybody is kind of adhering to your particular dictionary that you want to use. We've got the accept changes button. We've got the ability to plug in. If you're editing MathML equations, you can now plug draft space into your WIRIS instance to be able to edit them directly in line, and the drag and drop, as we said, and a few other things, but these are the highlights for now. So Chip, I believe you've got a demo for us.
Pardon me, I do, Joe. Let me try to share my desktop here.
Fantastic.
And great introduction. So do you see my screen?
Yep, thank you.
Great. So let me get rid of one of these dialogues here, sorry. So what I'd like to do is start with review space. And as Joe mentioned, there's a lot of great usability improvements, and I'm just going to go to my full screen here. I'm just going to go F11. I'm actually in Firefox. And one of the first things you'll notice if you are using review space, draft space, is our new branding. So as many of you know, SDL became part of RWS last year. In fact, it was a year ago yesterday, Joe, that merger was complete. So we now have our new branding throughout the Tridion Docs SP4 release. So, but a couple of things. I think many of you have seen past demos with Joe and I, or maybe from folks from my team. But right now I'm logged in to review space as Sarah Polowick, and I'm a subject matter expert reviewer. So more or less, I pretty much have a read-only kind of view of this publication. And this particular sales guide it's a marketing opportunity, and so forth. And the nice thing is, I, of course, as a reviewer, get to see the workflow labels and so forth. And if you had configured workflows in your Tridion Docs system, you'd see them here as well. And I'll come back to that in a little bit later. On the right-hand side are the comments that Joe is talking about, and I'll come back to these in a bit. But I want to skip to the outline view. This is where things got interesting with both draft space and review space. So one thing we added, by the way, in SP3 is the ability to make this sidebar wider or narrow if you're running on an older version. So one of my favorite features is the ability to come up here and expand all your outline. And it's a really nice feature to be able to see, certain areas. We can also expand to certain levels, or I can collapse it. So just a very handy way. And I've worked with this with some large customer publications, and the response time is really, really good. Another new thing you're going to see, and this has been, Joe, I think a really hotly requested item. These are called badges, and what you'll notice is the outline view in draft and actually review space is showing me the workflow status for each of these objects. And this has been a request by many reviewers. Show me quickly what I need to review. So another new feature is the ability now to filter on these workflow statuses. So for example, I have 2 reviewed workflow states, and I can go ahead and set the filters. And now my outline view just shows the particular topics or components, as we now call them, in a review status. So now as a reviewer, I can quickly go to those particular areas in my publication to be able to look and review and see what we wanted. So another kind of nice feature that's been requested by many customers, and many of you I know are on this webinar, is the ability to see changes within review space, what we call document history. And now you'll see in review space, there's a button up here that says show changes. And as a reviewer, I can click on this show changes button, and up will pop the history, the revision history, and I can actually look at the changes that Sarah and myself have made over time. I can click on particular revisions. I'm going to go from the first revisions. And then as a reviewer, I'll see those changes in the right-hand pane and so forth. So really, really nice feature. And I can even navigate to the different areas within the search, or I'm sorry, within the display. And then I can also navigate back to seeing the full outline view and so forth. Very nice feature to be able to filter. Another nice feature is the ability to filter by particular word in the title. So for example, I want to search for everything, and I'm going to take these off. I can search for market, and now the outline view just shows me components that have market in the title. A very nice feature, Joe, I think, to be able to help in navigation and so forth. Those are some of the major features within review space. A couple of other thoughts are that, of course, we still have our commenting capabilities. And I think for many of you that have seen demos before in review space, I can simply highlight content and a bubble pops up. We have the ability to add a comment or add suggestion, and I'll show suggestions later. But then I can come in here and I can type in particular, and it's always too early for me on these webinars to type, and then I can save that particular comment. So that hasn't changed as either. So, so that's a couple of other things I want to show, and then I'm going to go back to draft space. So another feature that was requested by customers is the ability to see wide tables in review space. So one new feature in tables is the ability to hide and show the table, which was a requested feature. We know many of you have very large tables and sometimes they can take a bit of time to scroll by. So this show and hide is one new feature. Now, what you'll notice is a pretty wide table, and it's kind of squeezing it into my column width here in review space. And now I have the expand table capability that's available, was always available in draft space. We now have that in review space. And in fact, if I get rid of my outline view, I can see the width of the table, and now I can go in and make comments and so forth as I'm going through and so forth. Okay, so let's switch now to draft space. So now I'm going to switch to Chrome. And in draft space, I'm going to be myself, Chip. And what I'm going to do now is going to go again to full screen mode here so we can see a little bit more. So I'm just going to press F11. And again, here I'm running Chrome and so forth. So what I'd like to do is come in here and take a look at the comments area. So one really requested feature really since the beginning of collective spaces is the ability to quickly add in the suggested changes to a comment. So we have a new button here that allows me to apply this proposed suggestion to the highlighted text. So simply, and this, by the way, the text is up here. It's highlighted in yellow when I'm clicking on this comment here. If I click on this button, essentially what this comment, what draft space did is it just copied that content now directly into my draft space component in one simple button. And now I can resolve this and I can say complete it, and then I can click on done. So that was a heavily requested feature from many of our customers and so forth. So another area, and I'm going to go back to my outline view here. And again, I have this nice ability to, let's see, I'm going to look for industry, and I'm going to look for a component with industry. And of course, it's not there because I probably mistyped it. But let's do this. Joe, when are we going to be able to have webinars in the afternoon on the West Coast time? So let's get rid of this right here. There we go. So what I can do is another requested feature has been the ability to do a spell check. So if I look around in my various areas here, I'll actually see that we've added in quality checking. And Joe, maybe you want to talk a bit about the spell checker, that it's from Huntspell, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So you can plug in basically a standard format of dictionary. So it comes with an EN-US dictionary, a US English dictionary as default, but you can plug in your own one and you can tweak the dictionary that's there and includes kind of words to ignore and so on as well. But it's very nice standard format for doing that. So there's lots of actually free and open source dictionary files available that you can use.
Great, thanks, Joe. And as you can see, I can right click and I can actually select the word that I want to. There's also a nice navigation capability. So if I want to go to the next one, and then it will show me the particular required one and so forth. So really nice spell check feature. You can both do individual components or you can do the entire publication. So again, this was a very highly requested feature. Okay, so next what I'd like to do, I'm gonna go ahead and clear my filters here. And another requested feature has been the ability to drag and drop. So one nice thing is, the first thing is that we've renamed, it's everything in the user interface now calls it components. So we used to call them documents, which was a bit confusing for some of you and many of you actually. So now we call them components. So here I can go and I can actually browse the repository, and I'm going to actually go and look for a particular topic that I want to insert. And this, of course, is included. This has been pretty much available from the beginning, the ability to insert reusable components. But now when I put in my component, one thing you'll notice is we have a new symbol now that indicates reuse, that this concept is included multiple times and so forth. That's a little bit visual indicator. Now, what I can see is if I want to, I can just simply drag and drop this down into my outline view, and it places it down into that particular place in the map structure, or in the outline structure as we call it in DraftSpace. So essentially this is a map editor. We call them outlines in DraftSpace and ReviewSpace, but very nice feature to be able to drag and drop that into place where I want to be able to see particulars. Joe, another thing I wanted to ask you about is we translated the user interface to more languages, correct? In this release, I think Italian, French, and German.
Italian,
Is that
French.
true?
I think you're right.
Spanish, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I
I
don't
remember
have
that.
the excuse of it being early in the morning, Chip, but I think I've got a feeling Spanish was in there as well. So it's
Yeah,
all there in the release notes. That's
yeah.
all I can say. But yeah, 3 new
So
languages as well in the user
yeah.
interface, indeed. Yeah.
So if you have, thank you, Joe. So if you have users in Italy, which I would love to be in right now, anyways, but we're here in Portland. So anyways, so okay. A few more things, and Joe, and I'm going to hand it back to you. I want to go and take a look at some math formulas. So my team set up some really nice math formulas for those of you that like to geek out. What's interesting, Joe, you had mentioned many of the new markets that Tridion Docs users were working in pharma and life sciences, and also accounting. Formulas are used quite a bit in other industries. I was really interested to see. So what you'll see is this is a math formula, and I can click on it. And for those of you familiar with the data spec, I can come down here and I can launch the edit equation. And so to Joe's point, this is a third-party MathML editor called Wirus. It is commercially available. The customer needs to actually provide the editor itself for the integration. So RWS doesn't resell this, but it's a very popular tool. Many of our customers have been using this for years, and now we can integrate that in with DraftSpace. So I can come in here and I can add in certain symbols and so forth, and then I can save that. So I'm actually editing the MathML, and I've made those changes and saved it to that particular area. There also are some nice abilities to come in here in the user interface, and I always forget which menu it's in, but there's also the ability to insert MathML formulas within this area as well. We've got some pretty good examples, some good chemical equations, and some other kind of samples that are available that are supported by MathML. Okay, I'm coming up. One more thing, Joe, I'm going to show, then I'll hand it back to you. So many of you, Joe, you had nicely mentioned that we're seeing more and more professional authors want to be able to use DraftSpace. So one feature is now we display the Prologue. And this is some open source data training that we've included now with our demo systems. And I can actually come in here and I can make changes to particular names here and so forth. So this is actually editing in the Prologue, which is a new feature that we can now display within DraftSpace. And Joe, you always like to make the point that customers may want to hide this in DraftSpace. So that's configurable, correct?
Absolutely. In fact, we can say it's a new feature, but actually everybody's been able to do this for forever, really. Well, since we added this configuration ability in, I think, SP2 So it's there. We decided to make it a default, but by the same token, you can add, you know, other specialized elements that you have. For example, you can configure them to appear and so on. This was really important because it's not that we want to show everything by default all out of the box. It is supposed to be a focused writing environment to get some stuff done without worrying about the underlying structure. But nevertheless, as you say, Chip, it's very configurable, so you can show all the things that you want to show and not those that you don't want to show. Great demo. Thank you very much, Chip. Great to see it in action. So we're going to move topic now because this is still about the release timeline, but this is a kind of an additional suite, an additional option, which we're calling Semantic AI. And actually, so this is just set the scene a little bit. This is somewhat around taxonomy, but a modern view on taxonomy and all the things that it can do across and beyond an enterprise. So we have a little poll for you here. Chip, do you know how to make the poll do its thing? Here we go. This is great. So if it were not showing up for anyone, it's in the little polls drop down. You can click in there.
I'm on mute. I'm sorry, Joe. Do you hear me now?
Yep, I hear you.
So sorry about that. So everyone's polling right now, and I'm going to go ahead and close this here.
Very interesting.
And so what we found out is, let's see, I can see the results here. 45% of you say metadata is manual today and not shared. 36%, various groups have taxonomy or metadata, some is shared. And 12%, we already have a centralized taxonomy, and 6% others. So almost half of the people, Joe, don't have its manual metadata with really not sharing between groups.
Right. Well, in a way, that gives me a great jumping off point, I would say. By the way, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. That's good. Yeah, so metadata is manual and not shared. And I think that's the background a lot of us kind of come from, is that metadata is somewhat ad hoc. You have your definitions of what it should be, but it tends to be very siloed and localized. And it's a pity because of all people, you know, we in structured content know what it means to take care over content models, over structuring, over tagging, and to really make it count for something, and to be able to reuse that tagging for different purposes. So it was like conditions, you know, in some ways, yeah, conditions are for a specific purpose, switching on and off little blocks of content. But in some ways, they hook into something that's much wider because they're describing what is that piece of content. And that could reflect like, who is it for? What particular piece of product feature or whatever. It's a really rich kind of description of one aspect of your content. So great to be able to kind of reuse our metadata further, because so much of it, now that we've taken the time to kind of think about it and input some metadata, can be reused for other purposes. So that sets the scene for kind of the modern use of taxonomy and semantic AI. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So what do organizations recognize as ongoing needs? So I said, you know, we're doing a pretty good job of getting people those benefits that I mentioned before. So reducing risk, getting more value out of the same content, and cost savings, of course. And we're making that more broadly applicable now to different kinds of organizations and different teams in your same organizations. But what can we do better? And these are some of the typical things that we hear. Make authors and editors more productive still, you know. We save time, not manually desktop publishing and so on. What can we do though? Because especially as we write more and more content, even in DITA, even with the best of practices, you're going to get quite a lot of stuff and it becomes a little bit hard to manage sometimes, even duplicate topics. How can we make things overall more productive? How can you improve the customer experience? Of course, this is so important. We always want to do this, and it's an ongoing thing. And a lot of that involves access to content, you know, quickly finding what you want. And then there's this kind of sense of, I'm sure many of you have felt this. I mean, I felt it as kind of the tech lead in the user education team. It's like, what are we going to be asked to do next? because you can never stand still, right? In documentation, there's always going to be a fresh challenge, a fresh need for your content, because it's the lifeblood in many ways of the product and the organization. You never quite know what's coming around the corner and what's going to be demanded of you, and whether you can do it or whether it's going to require big changes. So this kind of anxiety. And well, I've already hinted what I'm building up to, because semantic technology can help with all of these things. I'll just give you a brief overview of how. So they're making authors and editors more productive. Now, first of all, let me take a negative view on it, because whenever we're talking of adding any new capabilities, I think we should be a little bit careful to not make people's lives more complicated or worse, right? We as technologists get so excited about the new shiny stuff, and yet it's got to make a true difference, a net benefit to our users, really. So first of all, whatever we're doing with this semantic technology, let's not impose more burdens on editorial teams. But then how can we help them? And I think a lot of it is about finding what's been done before. It's with a growing kind of repository of content, it can be hard to find things. We've got, of course, folders, we've got ways to search for things, but it's great to get even more ways to kind of quickly and intuitively find what's been done before, see if you don't need to write a topic again, or if you can be inspired by something and write something that complements that. So that's one aspect of this. Now, findability, of course, is very much about improving the customer experience. So what can we do? And now, all things around taxonomy and its related kind of fields of synonyms and kind of recommendations and things like this, they're very much good ways to improve the customer experience. So I'll talk to that in a little bit. And then the coping with future demands. It's really to say that so much of using your content effectively depends on the machines being able to understand what is that content about, who does it suit, doing what type of a task specifically, in which geography, with which particular product, in which role, and so on and so on. So once you have your content tagged up nicely with this information, that's a great way to kind of cope with whatever future demands will be made of your content. So let's get a little bit more detailed now. So this tagging content in the first place. See if I can play this video. It may or may not be smooth on your end. Apologies if it's not. But the traditional approach to taxonomy tagging of content was very onerous. It needed a lot of training, actually, to get the right kind of tags, the right things, and you used to have these huge kind of trees. This is a kind of medium-sized, I would say, big public taxonomy. It's Eurovoc, popular in kind of the Eurozone, for all sorts of things, kind of agricultural, finance, all sorts of things. And if you're forced to use this to tag your content directly, just picking out of the tree, it's kind of hard. And you might be tempted, especially if you're like a subject matter expert author, you might be tempted to just kind of pick the first thing in the list and move quickly on because it's so daunting. So we challenged ourselves to get a really best-in-class kind of assisted tagging mechanism, one that keeps the humans in the loop. This is really important. So we couldn't do a purely automatic, like set it and forget it thing, because we know, risk is so important, minimizing risk. There's a risk that you can get it wrong, so you have to keep the human in the loop to always be able to kind of tweak things and improve them, and that's what we wanted to do. So we looked at many different ways that people have done smart tagging, kind of tagging assistance interfaces, and we've come up with something that, in my honest opinion, is smoother and better than anything that's been done before. So what you're not seeing, and Chip is going to show you later, on the left of this is just from DraftSpace. You've got a regular topic. You've clicked your Suggest Tags button at the bottom. It suggested a bunch of tags in appropriate kind of different facets, as you can see. So it's been quite smart about it. You have the complete choice what you do with those. Do you accept them? Do you not? Do you tag something else from the list, which actually has a nice kind of type ahead filter and stuff, so it's not that intimidating tree that we saw. It's a very usable. Also predictable, this is a big thing. At one point, we started looking at a whole kind of additional workflow for this stuff to say, well, what happens if you've tagged and then you tweak your taxonomy, and then we're going to kind of keep a record of that and this whole kind of log. it was getting really, really complex and overpowered for what it needed to do. So what we've chosen to do instead is make all changes really visible, keep the human in control, but not overwhelm people with information. So if tags are updated here because you've clicked suggest tags again, you get this little suggestions updated button. So just little tweaks like that to make it usable, but not intimidating, but still kind of accurate and well governed. Now on the other side, so moving ahead to content findability, really important first of all to join it up. So again, it's this thing about not being siloed. So here we're looking at a faceted search experience. And you can build a faceted search experience on a website with no proper kind of joined up taxonomy. You just kind of build it in the tool, and then you have to maintain it there from then on. And whoever else is doing other things with like synonyms, with enterprise kind of tagging and categorization and stuff, you're not getting the benefit of any of that. So it has to be all redone in different places. You're not getting standardized labels and terminologies and hierarchies. So the point with this was join it up, base it off that same kind of industry standard taxonomy, that centralized taxonomy that you're using. So whenever you tweak the label for something, it gets updated in all the kind of user-facing interfaces as well, very smoothly. And so it's not in the data XML literally, it's using the properties in Tridion Docs and using them in a smart way as well. So it's not embedding literal kind of labels in any one language. It's saying like, I'm tagging this content with a concept of, let's say, vehicles, and I just have an ID for that concept. And so whenever I need to show a different label in a different language, or if I move that in the taxonomy to a different piece of the hierarchy, I don't have to retag the content. I don't have to take it back to draft or something. It all just works. It updates smoothly and in a decoupled way. And we've done a bit more, we've got a type ahead kind of search based on the concepts you're searching for. So not just the strings. If you can see this, a little bit small here, but I'm typing in car and it's finding me kind of auto. It would often find vehicle, things like this. So it's everything around that concept of vehicles and autos and all of this kind of stuff, which is very important because we can't expect our end users to be mind readers, to look inside of our organization and to understand the way that we call things and structure things. So very important to give these different options for searching. So these are this is a suite of features with the smart tagging, with the ability to manage taxonomies nicely, and with also these additions to the DXD dynamic delivery platform to get nice friendly APIs for doing these kind of facets and smart search and so on. Moving on a little bit, well, simply the fact of tagging in this way is already enabling future delivery in some ways. So this is a little proof of concept we're doing on Chatbots, and we're working towards this. So hope watch this space. But having content tagged already and nicely is a really nice driver for interfaces like Chatbots, because of course it's all about the intent of the user. What are people searching for? What do they need to do? And that matches very well with an intelligent taxonomy approach. But what else is on the way? Well, this word personalization. So we all want to get, the right content to the right people at the right time. That's the mantra, obviously, in intelligent content. But traditional personalization can be very, very intrusive in terms of collecting data. And so I was searching the word personalization, and I found this little graphic of the person with an arrow embedded in their brain. And I do think that's ironic because sometimes personalization feels a bit like somebody is that intrusive, an arrow in your brain. And it's really hard to do well. It's expensive, hard to measure, all sorts of things. This is a good blog post, by the way, if you fancy reading a bit further. I think it's perhaps a little bit too positive on kind of machine learning at the end, but it's a good post anyway. So how does this semantic stuff help to power personalization briefly? So simply by baking in the semantics, and we are building at the moment, not for this release, but upcoming, we're building the ability to do kind of suggestions based solely on things that have an affinity with what you're looking at now. So you're looking at a topic, it's based around a certain user task, probably a certain geography, maybe a certain user role and a certain product and so on. And so by smartly looking at the intersection of all of those things and looking for others that tick all those boxes, you're able to already do some simulation of kind of something that we think would be good for you next. So that's the very basic level that you can get almost for free. And of course, if you know what somebody's user role is already, if they're logged in or authenticated, you can do more with that, right? So you can drive this kind of recommender to say, well, I already know who this is, so take that out, don't make them selected, and then you can get stronger recommendations based on that. If you want to take it further, and in your web app implementation, you're actually able to collect session data. So you know what that person's already done in the session. It's not so intrusive still because you're not collecting it after the session. You just lose it at the end of every session. So this is, in many cases, seen as a better approach. If you have that, you can just make even more use of it on the back of this semantic data you already have. And even if you want to go to the whole hog, the kind of customer data platform and everything, where you do have the rights, you seek people's permission to collect a little bit of data on them, and you want to use that to improve their experiences, to help them find not only the first piece of content, but all the steps in the content to kind of complete their journey, then that's possible too. So this is a really important point. It's not just dropping people on one particular page. It's not just search in the first place. It's making sure that they get all the way with the content, to find all the things they need to make their decisions or do their work. And that's what we said the main point of this content was. So I just want to finish before another demo by Chip of these capabilities, just summing up what's in this offering. So it's the smart tagging that I talked about, that kind of intelligent but human governable tagging. The taxonomy space, where you get to manage kind of industry standard taxonomies. It's in the SCORS standards, so simple knowledge organization standards. That means you can reuse a lot of existing taxonomies. It also means when you publish out data that you can very easily understand what else it maps to, without having to do complicated metadata crosswalks and stuff. So you've got that taxonomy management, really easy to use as well as powerful, plus the semantic search features in DXD itself. Okay, Chip.
Great, Joe. Thank you. And you can hear me, right? So.
Yep, I can hear you fine.
There was a good question that this is an additional purchase that is required to support within Tridion Docs 14 Service Pack 4. Correct. So there are commercial considerations that your account manager, salesperson can happily help you with on the details. So I'm going to show a couple of interfaces. First off, I'm in draft space, and I'm actually going to go to full screen again. And this is an insurance policy information. So it's a common kind of content that we're seeing with many of our newer customers, or policies and procedures. And I'm going to first show draft space, and this is the properties dialog, where I have the general and other fields that you're familiar with. And by the way, this is all the same properties dialog and the configuration in the background. However, in draft space, obviously, we have a really nice intuitive kind of look. So this is my new taxonomy fields, and these are configurable based on the particular areas that you want to do. And now what I can do is, if I click on the Suggest Tags button, the taxonomy values, the terms, will actually come in, be automatically populated into these fields, as Joe mentioned. So Joe, that's the semantics. It's looking at the actual content, correct, in this topic to select these particular tags, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not just a naive kind of looking for the exact strings. It's working on the underlying concepts, indeed.
Exactly. And to Joe's point, I also have the ability, let's say I want to manually add a couple of tags, I can easily do that. And I can also remove certain tags if I don't want to. So we have kind of this human interaction. So then I can actually save those, and they're saved as part of that particular component. By the way, another nice feature, you'll notice that the properties no longer collapses. That's a new feature in SP4, that it retains open, which is really nice. So now let's switch to the new Oxygen. So this is Oxygen 23.1, which we add support for in Tridion Docs 14 SP4. you'll notice in my properties, I have the same button to say suggest tags. So a particular Oxygen author user can also do the suggest tags and so forth and store those as part. But Joe, you like to say that we can also do this in a batch mode. So for example, if I want to come in here and multi-select, let's say several topics here, there is also a get tags button on these particular objects, and then it will actually do a batch automatic tagging in the background and so forth. So there's a new event monitor in the publication manager that actually shows the queue if you're auto tagging several, or I should say smart tagging several topics. Finally, there is a setting in Service Pack 4 that you can do the smart tags on check-in by an author and other kind of batch modes. We know many of our customers like to do things in batch mode. So for example, if I go and multi-select several topics here, and I'll say apply tags, and I'll see this new event monitor that comes up around the smart tagging. So very, very intuitive approaches. Joe, as you said, there was a lot of design considerations to come in around the smart tagging that's now as a commercial option for SP4. Joe, did I miss anything or?
Looks great. Thank you, Chip. I think you covered it all. Fantastic. So if I just grab back the screen share, well, you can tell we're enthusiastic about this stuff because I seem to have talked a fair bit and we're nearly at the top of the hour. I'm going to whip super quick through kind of directions coming up. And this is recorded, as we say, so if I'm going too quickly, do feel free to watch the recording and pause on this slide and have a look through the details. And we'll have further things coming up. We've got an event next month, the Tridion Expert Summit, which is well worth attending. So more details on all of these. But just to say, we're still very much focused on ease of use and expanding now that ease of use. So the new web client organized space coming out in Docs 15. Which brings a very streamlined kind of way to do basically what you were doing in the old web client. So a streamlined modern interface with some easier ways to do some things. That's just really the foundation to be able to build kind of better web tooling in the future as well, and gradually kind of reducing the need for desktop tools at all. Ease of ownership, further security work. We've actually done a lot with security. You may not be aware, but we've got some kind of good accreditations and everything. So we're doing really well. We're best in class already, but further security work to stay best in class and more work on the automation suite, which I know a lot of you are getting some good use out of that. And then looking at releasing the public open API. So organized spaces using that privately so we can test out our own dog food, as I say. Then making that public, the new open API, much easier to integrate with and build on new authentication protocols and supported providers for that. And then also working, just a hint towards kind of more of that intelligent content delivery, the headless delivery, which we have now, making that even more developer friendly, looking at out-of-box delivery options, making them richer and more kind of different options there. And then finally working on end-to-end insights. I won't say a lot about that now, but this is something that we're really focusing on as well, to say how can we truly understand the value that this is bringing to the end users, and where you need to improve so you can improve the content and it's real end-to-end picture. So really enjoyed this session. Next steps quickly. I hope many of you are thinking of upgrading after this, and to plan that, please do contact your account manager or professional services. Do encourage you to come to that Tridion Expert Summit. It's on rws.com, but here's a quick link if you want to use the QR code. Do we have time for any questions now, Chip?
Yes, Joe. What's the release date for SP4? When's it going to be available for customers?
Oh, yeah, looking into the crystal ball, you know, we're never quite. It's going to be at least by early December. I've got my fingers crossed for the end of this month, but let's see.
On target. That's on target, Joe, from what was committed earlier this year. Thank you. So, no, I think we're about out of time, and there were some great questions from the audience. So I would just say, Joe, thank you to you and the development team for a fantastic release. There's a lot of rich features, a lot of features requested by our customers. So really, I think it's going to be a powerful release for our customers.
Fantastic, sounds good, Chip. And let's have a look at those questions and see what we can arrange to find a further follow-up way to
Yeah,
answer some of
yeah.
those.
Yeah. That I think we've about covered them, Joe. So for now, so
Good,
we'll
good.
come back if anyone has any further questions. They know how to reach us.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, I want to thank you for your time today. And
Thank you,
this
Chip.
session was recorded for those of you that want to watch it again and if you want to share with your colleagues. So, Joe, enjoy the rest of your day. Everyone have a nice day. And thanks for the time today.
Thank you, everyone.